In Chapter 8, we're going to look at marketing, technology, choice, and manipulation. By definition, advertising aims to persuade consumers to buy goods and services, many of which are non-essential. Although consumers have been encouraged to heed the warning caveat emptor, let the buyer beware, it is a valid question whether advertisers have an ethical obligation to rein in the often exaggerated claims of their marketing pitches. Most consumers would agree that they do. In fact, the award-winning Harvard University economist John Kenneth Galbraith directly addressed this issue in The Affluent Society, which was first published in 1958, in what he depicted as the dependence effect. Galbraith bemoaned the power of corporations to harness wide-ranging advertising strategies, marketing efforts, and sales pitches to influence consumer purchasing decisions. He asked whether it is possible for a sophisticated advertising campaign to create a demand for a product whose benefits are frivolous at best. If so, is there anything inherently wrong with that? Or are informed consumers themselves responsible for resisting temptation through misleading advertising claims, or exercising their own best judgment about whether to buy a product that might be successful, not because it deserves to be, but simply because of the marketing hype behind it? Free speech is guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment. By 1980, the Supreme Court had developed a rule for challenging government regulation of commercial speech. In the case of Central Hudson Electric Corporation versus Public Service Commission, the court set out a four-pronged test. First, commercial speech will not be constitutionally protected if it's misleading or concerns illegal activity. Speech that qualifies as protected commercial speech can still be regulated, but three conditions must be met. First, the government must demonstrate a substantial interest in regulating the speech. Next, the regulation has to serve its purpose and must directly advance whatever governmental interest has been asserted. Finally, it must be tailored to fit its purpose and no more extensive than necessary or necessarily tailored. The Federal Trade Commission is one of the first federal agencies to promote competition through its enforcement of the Sherman and Clayton Antitrust Acts and to protect consumers. The agency was established by the Federal Trade Act of 1914. This act outlawed unfair methods of competition and unfair and deceptive acts and practices, including false or misleading advertising. Deceptive advertising claims are those that are likely to mislead reasonable consumers, causing them to change their conduct. The FTC will typically investigate a complaint and attempt to settle it. One possible result is a consent decree that stops the ad from happening. We're also going to read about regulating native advertising, sometimes called stealth advertising. Native advertising is so smoothly embedded in its surrounding content that it's hard to tell that it's advertising at all. In late 2015, the FTC released a policy statement identifying 3 forms of native advertising that could be deceptive under the FTC Act. Number 1, advertising in a news format or that misrepresents their source or nature. Number 2, misleading door openers. Consumers can be deceived by misleading sales visits that are thought to be one thing that actually turn out to be sales visits or calls or emails. And then number 3, deceptive endorsements. The FTC requires endorsers of advertised products to make any financial connections to the sellers clear, when such connection would materially affect the weight of credibility of the endorsement and mislead consumers. The Lanham Act, while its focus is trademark registration and protection, Section 43A of the Act gives competitors the right to sue for false or misleading advertising, damaging to them. It has been interpreted to allow suits for false claims about either a company's own products or those of its rivals, and to include not only traditional advertising campaigns, but also infomercials, labels, and messages on telephone answering machines. To succeed under this act, the plaintiff must prove that the defendant made a factual misrepresentation about a product or service, something more than puffery or sales opinion or puffery to try to get a person to buy a product. The National Advertising Division of the Council of Better Business Bureau is the official self-policing mechanism of the advertising industry. It was set up in 1971 to prevent what might have been harsher governmental interference. It investigates about 150 disputes annually and resolves 95% of them. In about half the cases, the challenged company is let off the hook, and the rest of the time, the client company changes or agrees to stop the ad. The small portion of cases that are not resolved are appealed to the National Advertising Review Board, which evaluates them using standards close to those of the FTC and the Lanham Acts. Children are particularly susceptible to the ads commercial television reigns over them regularly. Generally, young children have not developed sufficient judgment to know what advertised products are good for them and which ones have little or no benefit, or perhaps can even harm them. Research has even shown that very young children have difficulty separating what is real on television from what is not. This is especially so as it pertains to advertising for junk food. Savvy marketers take advantage of the fact that young children, those younger than age 7 or 8, view advertising in the same manner they do information from trustworthy adults. That is very credible. And so marketers hone pitches for junk food directly to these children. What restrictions could we reasonably impose on those who gear their ads towards children? We can argue they should take special care that ads targeting children make absolutely no exaggerated claims, because children are less capable of seeing through the usual puffery that most of us ignore. Children are more literal, and once they gain the ability to understand messages directed towards them, especially when voiced by adult authority figures, they typically accept these as truthful statements. Enjoy reading Chapter 8.